Wyoming Territory, 1875. The telegram paper crumpled in Pearl Glover's trembling hands as she stared at the words that had just shattered her future. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Cheyenne train station platform, illuminating the dust particles dancing in the air around her, much like her dreams, now scattered to the wind. Not suitable, arrangement terminated, fare enclosed for return journey. 3 months of correspondence ended with a heartless message delivered by a bored telegraph operator. Pearl had traveled over 1,000 miles from Boston to meet her intended husband, only to be rejected before she'd even stepped off the train. "Miss, you getting back on?" The conductor's voice startled her. "Train's leaving in 5 minutes." Pearl looked up at the man, then down at the return ticket in her hand. Going back meant facing her family's disappointment, returning to the whispers that followed her everywhere in Boston society. At 24, with her pronounced limp and unfashionable opinions, she'd become an object of pity. "No," she said quietly, tucking the telegram into her pocket. "I believe I'll stay." The conductor shrugged. "Suit yourself, miss. But Cheyenne ain't no place for a lady alone." As the train whistle blew, Pearl gathered her modest luggage, one trunk and a carpet bag, and stepped decisively away from the platform. She had exactly $18.43 to her name, a teaching certificate, and the clothes on her back. It would have to be enough. The reason for her rejection was painfully obvious. Her letters to Mr. Harrington had never mentioned her childhood bout with polio that left her with a pronounced limp. She'd been careful to describe herself honestly in every other way: her honey blonde hair, hazel eyes, slim build, and education, but had omitted the one detail she knew might doom her chances. She'd been right. Pearl took a deep breath of the Wyoming air, crisp and clean, so unlike Boston's coal smoke atmosphere, and made her way toward the dusty Main Street. She would find work. She would survive. And she would never again place her future in the hands of a man who couldn't see beyond physical imperfection. Mitchell Thorne wiped sawdust from his brow as he examined the chair he'd just finished. The curves of the armrests flowed gracefully, each spindle of the back perfectly turned. It was good work, the kind that had earned his furniture shop a reputation throughout the Wyoming Territory. "Another beauty, Mitch," said Elijah Johnson, the town's only banker, who had wandered in to check on his custom dining set. "When you planning to find yourself a wife to make furniture for?" Mitchell smiled politely, having heard this question at least weekly for the past 5 years. At 32, he was considered something of an oddity in Whitewater Springs, successful, handsome with his dark hair and deep blue eyes, yet stubbornly single. "When I find a woman who appreciates craftsmanship more than gossip, Elijah." The banker laughed. "Good luck with that. Say, did you hear about that mail-order bride who got left at the station over in Cheyenne?" Harrington took one look at her and sent her packing. Telegraph operator told Frank Miller she had some kind of crippled leg. Mitchell's hands stilled on the wood, and Harrington rejected her for that. Well, man paid good money for passage. Can't blame him for wanting sound merchandise. Mitchell's jaw tightened. "A wife isn't merchandise, Elijah." The banker shrugged. "Anyway, word is she didn't get back on the train. Probably heading to one of the other settlements. Schoolteacher, I heard." After Elijah left, Mitchell couldn't focus on his work. His thoughts kept drifting to the unknown woman from the east, abandoned in a strange territory simply because she walked differently. It struck too close to home, reminding him of his own brother Thomas. Born with a clubfoot, yet the finest horseman Mitchell had ever known before typhoid took him 5 years prior. By closing time, Mitchell had made his decision. Whitewater Springs needed a teacher. Their last one had married a rancher and moved to Colorado the previous spring. The town council had been discussing hiring someone, and now Providence had delivered a qualified educator to their doorstep. He locked up his shop and headed toward the mayor's house, a plan forming in his mind. Pearl stood at the doorway of Cheyenne's only boarding house, trying to ignore the suspicious glare from the proprietress, Mrs. Wilkins. The woman's eyes had immediately dropped to Pearl's leg upon her arrival, and her lips had pursed into a thin line of disapproval. "I don't run that sort of establishment," the woman said coldly. "Decent women only." Pearl felt her cheeks burn. "I assure you, Mrs. Wilkins, I am a schoolteacher from Boston. I can provide references." References don't explain why a proper lady arrives alone with no husband or family to meet her. The woman crossed her arms. Word travels fast. You're that mail-order bride Harrington rejected. Pearl lifted her chin. I am indeed the woman Mr. Harrington chose not to marry. That speaks to his character, not mine. I have a teaching certificate and am seeking employment. The standoff might have continued if not for the timely arrival of a young woman with kind eyes and a friendly smile. Mrs. Wilkins, are you badgering newcomers again? The woman stepped forward, extending her hand to Pearl. I'm Sarah Cooper, the doctor's wife. Don't mind Mrs. Wilkins. She treats everyone like potential criminals until proven otherwise. Mrs. Wilkins huffed but retreated inside, leaving the door open. Thank you, Pearl said, relief washing over her. I'm Pearl Glover, recently arrived from Boston, and in need of lodging and employment, I'd wager. Sarah smiled. You're in luck. My husband and I have a spare room since our daughter married last spring, and I happen to know several settlements are desperate for teachers. That evening, over a simple but delicious dinner, Pearl found herself telling her story to Sarah and Dr. Thomas Cooper. They listened without judgment, their kindness a balm to Pearl's wounded pride. Harrington is a fool, Dr. Cooper pronounced when she finished. Any man worth his salt knows character matters more than physical perfection. Thomas, Sarah admonished gently, though Pearl could see she agreed. Actually, Dr. Cooper continued, unabashed, I received a telegram just this afternoon. Whitewater Springs is looking for a teacher immediately. It's a growing settlement about 60 miles northwest of here. Decent folks, from what I understand. Pearl felt hope stirring. Do you think they would consider me? I'll write a letter of introduction, the doctor said. The stagecoach leaves tomorrow morning. If you're willing to take a chance on a frontier town, I suspect they'd be more than willing to take a chance on a Boston-educated teacher. That night, in the Coopers' guest room, Pearl stared at the ceiling, weighing her options. She could return to Boston and the pitying glances of her family, or she could forge ahead into the unknown. The West had already shown her both cruelty and kindness in equal measure. Perhaps Whitewater Springs would offer a fresh start, a place where she could be judged by her abilities rather than her limitations. Pearl made her decision. She would go to Whitewater Springs. The stagecoach journey was every bit as arduous as Pearl had been warned. By the time they approached Whitewater Springs on the second day, her entire body ached from the constant jolting, and her leg throbbed with pain she refused to acknowledge. Her fellow passengers, a young married couple and an elderly gentleman, had been polite but reserved, asking few questions about why a woman was traveling alone to a frontier settlement. Pearl was grateful for their discretion. As the stagecoach rolled into town, Pearl took in her surroundings with keen interest. Whitewater Springs was larger than she'd expected, perhaps 40 or 50 buildings spread along a wide main street, with homes and farms dotting the surrounding countryside. The buildings were a mix of rough-hewn timber and more refined construction, suggesting a town in transition from frontier outpost to established settlement. The coach lurched to a stop in front of a two-story building with a sign proclaiming it the Whitewater Springs Hotel and Restaurant. End of the line, folks, the driver called down. Pearl gathered her belongings and accepted the driver's hand to descend from the coach. She was keenly aware of her limp after the long journey, each step sending shooting pain up her leg. Still, she maintained the dignity her mother had instilled in her, keeping her back straight and her head high. To her surprise, a small group had gathered to meet the coach, unusual from what she understood of frontier customs. Even more surprising, a tall man with dark hair and striking blue eyes stepped forward directly toward her. Miss Glover, he inquired, doffing his hat. I'm Mitchell Thorne, chairman of the town council. We received Dr. Cooper's telegram about your interest in the teaching position. Pearl nodded, momentarily speechless at this unexpected welcome. She had assumed she would need to seek out the town officials herself. Yes, I'm Pearl Glover, she managed, offering her hand. I'm pleased to meet you, Mr. Thorne. His handshake was firm but gentle, his calloused palms speaking of manual labor despite his well-spoken manner. The pleasure is ours, Miss Glover. We've been without a teacher since spring, and the children are getting restless without proper schooling. A middle-aged woman pushed forward. I'm Martha Wilson, member of the school board. We've prepared the teachers' quarters behind the schoolhouse. It's modest but comfortable. Pearl felt overwhelmed by the warm reception. Thank you. But don't you wish to interview me first? Review my credentials. Mitchell Thorne smiled, creating crinkles at the corners of his eyes. Dr. Cooper vouched for your qualifications, and that's good enough for us to start. Of course, the school board will want to meet with you officially tomorrow, but for now, let's get you settled. As they walked toward the schoolhouse at the end of the main street, Pearl was acutely conscious of her limping gait. Though no one mentioned it, she felt eyes on her from townsfolk pausing in their activities to observe the newcomer. The schoolhouse was a simple but sturdy structure with large windows to admit natural light. Behind it stood a small cottage, just one room with a lean-to kitchen addition, but neat and freshly whitewashed. "It's lovely," Pearl said sincerely as they showed her inside. The room contained a narrow bed, a writing desk, 2 chairs, a small bookshelf, and a pot-bellied stove for heating. Simple homemade curtains framed the windows, and a braided rug covered part of the wooden floor. "Martha and the ladies fixed it up when we heard you were coming," Mitchell explained. "The privy is out back, and there's a pump for water just outside the kitchen door. Not what you're used to in Boston, I expect." "It's perfect," Pearl said, meaning it. After the events of the past few days, this small space that belonged to her, however temporarily, seemed like a palace. After Martha and the others left, Mitchell lingered at the doorway. "Supper's at the hotel dining room at 6, Miss Glover. The town's hosting, to welcome you properly." Pearl felt a flash of panic. A public welcome dinner meant being on display, her limp the subject of curious stares and whispered comments. "That's very kind, but I'm quite tired from the journey. Perhaps another time." Mitchell studied her face, and Pearl had the uncomfortable feeling he could read her thoughts. "Folk around here are plain-spoken but good-hearted," he said quietly. "Best to meet them head-on. Shows strength of character." With that gentle challenge, he bowed slightly and departed, leaving Pearl to wonder about the perceptive furniture maker who seemed to see more than others. The welcome dinner proved less daunting than Pearl had feared. Seated at the head table with the mayor, the school board members, and Mitchell Thorne, she found herself fielding questions about Boston, her teaching experience, and her journey west rather than facing scrutiny about her physical condition. If the townspeople noticed her limp as she walked to her seat, they gave no obvious sign. In fact, Pearl observed that Whitewater Springs had its share of residents marked by injury or hardship: a miner with missing fingers, an elderly woman who appeared to be blind in one eye, a rancher with a pronounced burn scar covering half his face. Perhaps in a frontier town, physical imperfections were simply part of life's tapestry, not objects of fascination or pity as they'd been in Boston society. Throughout the evening, Pearl found her gaze repeatedly drawn to Mitchell Thorne. He spoke little but seemed to listen intently to everything. When he did speak, others fell silent to hear him. There was something compelling about his quiet authority that intrigued her. As the evening wound down, Mitchell approached her table. "How are you finding Whitewater Springs so far, Miss Glover?" "Everyone has been remarkably welcoming," she replied honestly. "I'm looking forward to meeting the children tomorrow. They're excited to meet you as well. We have 28 students of various ages. Some can only attend when farm work allows, but they're eager to learn." Pearl hesitated, then asked the question that had been on her mind all evening. "Mr. Thorne, may I ask why you went to such lengths to bring me here?" "Dr. Cooper mentioned a telegram specifically requesting me." Mitchell's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. "Whitewater Springs needs a teacher. Dr. Cooper mentioned you were qualified and available. But there must be other teachers closer than Boston." He studied her for a moment. "Miss Glover, out here we judge people by what they can contribute, not by other factors. Dr. Cooper described a well-educated woman of character who needed a fresh start. Whitewater Springs needs good people willing to build something meaningful." It seemed a fortunate coincidence for both parties. Pearl wasn't entirely convinced, suspecting there was more to the story, but she nodded. "Well, I'm grateful for the opportunity, however it came about." As she made her way back to her cottage later that evening, Pearl reflected on the strange turn her life had taken. A week ago, she had been preparing to become Mrs. Harrington, wife to a man she knew only through letters. Now she was Miss Glover, the schoolteacher of Whitewater Springs, an independent woman for perhaps the first time in her life. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a pair of thoughtful blue eyes lingered. The following weeks were among the most challenging and rewarding of Pearl's life. Her students ranged from 6-year-old Tommy Wilson, who could barely sit still for 10 minutes, to 17-year-old Rebecca Johnson, who dreamed of attending college back east. Some could barely read. Others hungered for knowledge beyond Pearl's Boston education. She adapted, learning as much from her students as they learned from her. When 12-year-old Samuel Parker couldn't grasp fractions through traditional methods, Pearl used pieces of wood, courtesy of Mitchell's furniture shop, to demonstrate the concepts. When the younger children grew restless, she took them outside to study nature directly rather than from books. Word of her innovative teaching methods spread, and soon parents began appearing at the back of the classroom, observing with approval as their children engaged enthusiastically with subjects that had once seemed tedious. Pearl's integration into Whitewater Springs extended beyond the schoolhouse. Martha Wilson invited her to join the Ladies' Aid Society, where she found herself helping to make quilts and preserves for families in need. Dr. Abernathy, the town physician, asked her to help organize his medical texts and correspondence, impressed by her neat handwriting and organizational skills. And then there was Mitchell Thorne. The furniture maker found reasons to visit the schoolhouse regularly, replacing a broken desk, adding shelves to store supplies, crafting a special chair for Pearl that somehow eased the pressure on her bad leg during long teaching days. He never mentioned her disability, but his thoughtful accommodations spoke volumes. One crisp October afternoon, as the children were being dismissed, Pearl looked up to find Mitchell at the schoolhouse door, a wooden crate in his arms. "Mr. Thorne," she greeted him with a smile that came more naturally these days. "Another delivery?" "Maps," he explained, setting the crate on her desk. "Found them in Denver last week. Thought they might be useful, United States, Europe, and the world. The children should know there's more beyond these mountains." Pearl opened the crate, running her fingers over the rolled parchments with delight. "These must have been expensive." Mitchell shrugged. "Town council approved the expense. Education matters." But Pearl suspected the council might not know about this particular expenditure. She'd learned that Mitchell often acted independently, addressing needs he observed without waiting for official approval. "Would you care to help me hang them?" she asked impulsively. They worked side by side, Mitchell handling the hammer and nails while Pearl directed placement. The simple domesticity of the task created a comfortable intimacy that neither acknowledged but both felt. "You've done wonders with this place," Mitchell observed as they stepped back to admire the maps adorning the previously bare walls. "The children are thriving under your instruction. They're bright and eager to learn," Pearl said. "All they needed was someone to take them seriously." "Like all of us," Mitchell replied softly. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits. Pearl felt her cheeks warm and turned away first. "Mr. Thorne, Mitchell," he corrected gently. "After all this time, I think we can dispense with formalities when the children aren't present." "Mitchell," she amended, liking the way his name felt on her lips. "I've been meaning to thank you." "For the maps?" "No thanks needed. Not just the maps. For bringing me to Whitewater Springs. For seeing something in me worth taking a chance on." Mitchell was silent for a moment. "I should confess something, Miss Glover." "Pearl." He ran a hand through his dark hair, suddenly appearing uncomfortable. "I knew about your situation before you arrived. About Harrington's rejection." Pearl stiffened, her earlier warmth evaporating. "I see. So this was charity, then? Poor crippled woman needs rescuing." "No," Mitchell said firmly. "It wasn't like that." "Then what was it like, Mr. Thorne?" The formality returned to her tone. Mitchell's blue eyes held her steadily. "My brother Thomas was born with a clubfoot. People underestimated him his entire life, all 27 years of it. But he was the best man I ever knew. When I heard about what happened in Cheyenne, I recognized an injustice similar to what Thomas faced. But I also saw an opportunity for this town to gain a qualified teacher who might be overlooked elsewhere for foolish reasons." Pearl absorbed this, her indignation softening. "And the town council? Did they know?" "They knew we needed a teacher. The rest wasn't relevant to your qualifications." Pearl nodded slowly, appreciating his honesty even as she processed what it meant. Mitchell had seen beyond her physical limitation from the beginning, not ignoring it, but simply accepting it as one part of who she was, neither defining nor diminishing her worth. "Thank you for telling me," she said finally. "And for your brother Thomas. He sounds like someone I would have admired." "You would have. And he would have admired you greatly." Mitchell picked up his hat from the desk. "Good afternoon, Miss Glover. I look forward to hearing what the children think of their new maps." As he left, Pearl remained beside the colorful rendering of the world, feeling both smaller and larger simultaneously, a tiny bit in the vastness of creation, yet somehow significant enough to have been chosen specifically for this place, this role, this life that was becoming increasingly her own. The first snowfall came early to Whitewater Springs that year, blanketing the town in pristine white before Thanksgiving. The sudden storm caught several students at the schoolhouse, forcing Pearl to make a difficult decision. "We'll stay here until it's safe," she told the 7 children who remained as the blizzard intensified outside. "Rebecca, please check our wood supply. Samuel, help me push these desks together." By rearranging the furniture, Pearl created a sheltered area near the stove where the children could huddle together for warmth. She distributed the emergency blankets she kept in the supply closet and set about preparing a simple meal from her personal provisions. As darkness fell and the storm showed no signs of abating, Pearl did her best to maintain a calm demeanor, leading the children in songs and stories to distract them from their predicament. Inside, however, she worried. The schoolhouse was sturdy but drafty, and the temperature was dropping rapidly. A pounding at the door startled them all. Pearl limped quickly to answer it, relieved to find Mitchell standing there, snow covering his hat and coat, a lantern held high in one gloved hand. "Mitchell, what are you doing out in this storm?" "Checking on you and the children," he said, stamping snow from his boots as he entered. "The whole town is worried. Parents couldn't make it through the drifts." The children crowded around him, peppering him with questions about their families. Mitchell assured them everyone was safe, but waiting out the storm. "I've brought supplies," he said, producing a sack from beneath his coat. Bread, cheese, dried meat. And more importantly, he pulled out several hot bricks wrapped in flannel. "For your feet." The hotel kitchen had them ready. "You shouldn't have risked yourself," Pearl admonished, even as she gratefully accepted the warm bricks to distribute. Mitchell smiled. "I tied a rope from the furniture shop to the schoolhouse. Wasn't risking much." As the evening progressed, the children eventually fell asleep, wrapped in blankets around the stove. Pearl and Mitchell sat at her desk, speaking in hushed tones. "How did you know we needed help?" Pearl asked, wrapping her hands around the cup of tea Mitchell had somehow produced from his seemingly bottomless supplies. "I didn't," he admitted. "But I knew you'd stay with any children stranded here, and I knew this building gets cold during storms." The mathematics was simple. Pearl studied him in the lantern light. "You think of everything, don't you?" "Not everything," Mitchell replied softly. "Just the things that matter." Their conversation meandered through various topics. Books they'd both read, places they'd seen, dreams they'd harbored. Pearl found herself revealing thoughts she'd rarely expressed aloud. Her desire to someday write educational materials that made learning accessible to all children. Her secret wish to see the ocean again. Mitchell, in turn, spoke of his hope to expand his furniture business, perhaps even display his pieces in Denver or San Francisco someday. "I want to create things that outlast me," he explained. "Pieces that families will pass down through generations." "You already do," Pearl said. "I've seen your work around town. It's beautiful." A comfortable silence fell between them, punctuated only by the crackling of the stove and the soft breathing of sleeping children. "May I ask you something personal?" Mitchell finally said. Pearl tensed slightly, but nodded. "Why did you agree to be a mail-order bride? You're educated, capable. You could have remained in Boston." The question caught Pearl off guard, but something about the stillness of the snowbound night and Mitchell's genuine interest prompted honesty. "In Boston, I was defined by my limitations," she said slowly. "After my illness, my family became protective to the point of suffocation. They meant well, but they couldn't see beyond my limp to the person I wanted to become. As for marriage prospects," she smiled ruefully, "Boston society has exacting standards for feminine perfection." "Fools," Mitchell murmured. "Perhaps, but reality nonetheless. When I saw Mr. Harrington's advertisement, a rancher seeking an educated wife to help establish a cultured household in Wyoming territory, it seemed like providence. A chance to be valued for my mind rather than judged for my body. And yet he judged you anyway." Pearl nodded. The irony wasn't lost on me. "But had he not rejected me, I wouldn't be here now." "And where would you rather be?" Mitchell asked, his voice soft but intent. "His ranch or the schoolhouse?" Pearl didn't hesitate. "Here. Unquestionably here." Mitchell's smile in response warmed her more than any brick or stove could manage. By morning, the storm had passed. Parents arrived at the schoolhouse, relief evident on their faces as they collected their children. Pearl accepted their gratitude with grace, downplaying her own role in keeping their children safe and warm. No one seemed surprised to find Mitchell Thorne there as well, as if his presence beside Pearl during a crisis was the most natural thing in the world. Perhaps, Pearl thought as she watched him help the smallest children navigate the snow drifts, it was becoming exactly that. The Christmas season transformed Whitewater Springs. Despite the frontier setting, the townspeople embraced the holiday with enthusiasm. Evergreen boughs decorated storefronts, candles appeared in windows, and the Ladies' Aid Society organized a holiday bazaar to raise funds for the church roof. Pearl threw herself into preparations for the school Christmas pageant, helping children memorize poems and carols to perform for their parents. The excitement was contagious, lifting her spirits even as she felt occasional pangs of homesickness for Boston's elaborate Christmas traditions. On a Saturday afternoon 2 weeks before Christmas, Pearl was at the schoolhouse arranging costumes when a knock at the door revealed Mitchell, his arms full of precisely cut wood pieces. "I had an idea for your pageant," he explained, laying out the pieces on a desk. "Thought the children might enjoy building a small nativity scene to display. I've cut the pieces, they just need assembly and painting." Pearl clapped her hands in delight. "That's wonderful. The children will love this project." Working together, they organized the wood pieces into kits for each figure: Mary, Joseph, shepherds, wise men, and animals. Mitchell showed Pearl how the notched pieces would fit together to create three-dimensional figures. "You're remarkably talented," Pearl observed, admiring the delicate details he'd carved into each face. Mitchell shrugged modestly. "Just something I enjoy. My father taught me whittling when I was young. Found I had a knack for seeing what the wood could become." "Like you see what people can become," Pearl said without thinking. Mitchell looked up, surprise evident in his expression. "What do you mean?" Pearl felt her cheeks warm. "You see potential. In wood, in this town, in people who others might overlook. Some things are plain to see if you're paying attention," he replied, his eyes never leaving hers. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. Pearl found herself wishing he would move closer, perhaps take her hand, or... The schoolhouse door burst open as Rebecca Johnson rushed in, breaking the spell. "Miss Glover, I've finished the backdrop paintings for the pageant. Would you like to see them?" Pearl pulled her gaze from Mitchell's, turning to her enthusiastic student with a smile that felt slightly strained. "Of course, Rebecca. Let's see them." As Rebecca spread her paintings across the desks, Pearl was conscious of Mitchell watching her, his expression thoughtful. When he left shortly afterward, Pearl felt both relief and disappointment, conflicting emotions that followed her through the remainder of the day. The Christmas pageant was a resounding success. Every child performed admirably, from little Tommy Wilson's slightly lispy recitation of The Night Before Christmas to Rebecca's beautiful rendition of Silent Night. The nativity scene, painted in bright colors by enthusiastic students, drew admiration from all the parents. After the performance, as families mingled and enjoyed cider and cookies, Mitchell approached Pearl. "Congratulations on a wonderful pageant, Miss Glover." "Thank you. Though much of the credit belongs to you for the nativity scene. The children were so proud of their work." "I was wondering," Mitchell said, suddenly seeming uncharacteristically hesitant, "if you might join me for Christmas dinner. At my home." Pearl blinked in surprise. "Your home? It's a small cabin behind the furniture shop. Nothing fancy, but..." He paused. "No one should be alone at Christmas." Pearl was touched by his consideration. She had been preparing herself for a solitary holiday, having declined Martha Wilson's invitation to join her large extended family. "That's very kind of you, Mitchell. I'd be delighted." His smile transformed his face, making him appear younger, almost boyish in his pleasure. "Excellent. 1 o'clock. 1 o'clock, she confirmed. As she walked home that evening, Pearl found herself thinking about the coming Christmas with a sense of anticipation she hadn't felt in years. She told herself it was simply gratitude for not being alone on the holiday. But in her heart, she knew it was more, much more, than that. Christmas Day dawned clear and cold, sunlight sparkling off the snow that blanketed Whitewater Springs. Pearl dressed with particular care, selecting her best dress, a forest green wool with subtle embroidery at the collar and cuffs. She arranged her honey blonde hair in a more elaborate style than her usual practical bun, allowing a few tendrils to frame her face. At precisely 1 o'clock, she arrived at Mitchell's cabin, a small but well-built structure behind his furniture shop. Smoke curled invitingly from the chimney, and evergreen boughs decorated the doorway. Pearl took a deep breath and knocked. Mitchell opened the door immediately, as if he'd been waiting just inside. His smile of welcome warmed her more than the fire visible in the hearth behind him. "Merry Christmas, Pearl. Please, come in." The cabin's interior surprised her. Though small, it was beautifully furnished with Mitchell's own creations, each piece showing his extraordinary craftsmanship. A sturdy table had been set with what appeared to be his best dishes, and delicious aromas filled the space. "This is lovely," Pearl said, genuinely impressed. "I had no idea you were such a domestic gentleman." Mitchell chuckled. "I can't claim credit for the cooking. Mrs. Abernathy prepared most of it. Payment for a bookcase I made for the doctor last month." Pearl smiled, charmed by his honesty. "Well, it smells wonderful." The meal was indeed delicious. Roast beef, potatoes, carrots with honey, fresh bread, and mincemeat pie for dessert. Their conversation flowed easily, covering topics from books they'd both read to plans for the spring term at school. After they'd eaten, Mitchell handed Pearl a wrapped package. "A small Christmas gift." "Mitchell, I didn't expect," Pearl began, flustered. She had brought him a gift as well, a hand-knitted scarf, but it suddenly seemed inadequate compared to the carefully wrapped package in her hands. "Open it," he urged. Pearl carefully untied the ribbon and removed the paper to reveal a wooden box, exquisitely carved with a pattern of books and apples. When she opened the hinged lid, a delicate melody played. "Beautiful dreamer." "A music box," she breathed. "It's exquisite." "Look inside," Mitchell prompted. Pearl lifted the velvet lining to discover a small compartment beneath, containing a silver pendant in the shape of a star on a delicate chain. "Mitchell, this is too much," she protested, even as her fingers gently traced the star's perfect points. "The box I made," he explained. "The pendant I found in Denver. It reminded me of you, guiding others toward knowledge, shining bright in our little town." Pearl felt tears welling in her eyes. No one had ever given her such a thoughtful gift, one that celebrated her role as a teacher rather than attempting to compensate for her physical limitations. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say you'll wear it," Mitchell suggested, his voice gentle. Pearl nodded, removing the pendant from the box. Mitchell rose and took it from her hands, moving behind her to fasten it around her neck. His fingers brushed against her skin, sending an unexpected shiver down her spine. When he returned to his seat, his expression had grown serious. "Pearl, there's something I need to tell you." Her heart quickened at his tone. "Yes. When I first arranged for you to come to Whitewater Springs, my intentions were honorable, but incomplete. I wanted to right a wrong, to give a qualified teacher an opportunity she deserved." Pearl nodded, wondering where this confession was leading. "But these past months, watching you build a life here, seeing your strength and determination, my feelings have changed, deepened." Mitchell's blue eyes held her steadily. "I find myself thinking about you constantly, wondering if perhaps someday you might consider." He stopped, seeming to struggle for words. "Consider what?" Pearl asked softly, hardly daring to breathe. "A life together," Mitchell finished. "Not now? I wouldn't presume so much so soon. But someday, when you've had time to establish yourself fully, to be certain of your place here. I would like your permission to court you properly." Pearl sat stunned, the pendant warm against her skin. Of all the outcomes she had imagined for her Western adventure, finding someone who valued her exactly as she was had never seemed possible. "Mitchell," she finally said, "are you certain? My condition won't improve. In fact, as I age, it may worsen." "Do you think I don't know that?" he asked gently. "Pearl, I see you, all of you. Your brilliant mind, your kind heart, your determination. The way you limp is just how you move through the world. It's part of you, but it doesn't define you." Tears spilled down Pearl's cheeks now, unchecked. "No one has ever seen me that way before. Then everyone before me was blind," Mitchell said simply. He reached across the table, his hand open in invitation. "You don't need to answer now. Just know that my feelings are genuine, and whenever you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'll be here." Pearl placed her hand in his, marveling at how right it felt. "I don't need time," she said, surprising herself with her certainty. I've spent my whole life being judged for what I can't do. You're the first person who has ever valued me for what I can. Mitchell's fingers tightened around hers. Is that a yes to my courtship? Pearl smiled through her tears. Yes, Mitchell Thorne. That's a yes. Spring came early to Whitewater Springs in 1876, transforming the snow-covered landscape into a riot of wildflowers and fresh green grass. Pearl watched the seasons change from the schoolhouse window, absently touching the star pendant that she now wore daily. 6 months had passed since Christmas Day, and Mitchell had been true to his word about a proper courtship. They attended church together each Sunday, shared meals several times a week, and took walks through town when weather permitted. Mitchell had even arranged for Pearl to ride in a specially adapted buggy so she could see more of the surrounding countryside without taxing her leg. Throughout their courtship, Pearl had been touched by Mitchell's consideration. He never treated her as fragile or incapable, but he thoughtfully removed obstacles when possible and offered support when needed, always with a matter-of-factness that preserved her dignity. The town had watched their developing relationship with obvious approval. Pearl occasionally overheard comments that suggested the townspeople had predicted this outcome from the beginning. Knew Mitch was sweet on her the minute he heard about that teacher from Boston. Never seen him craft furniture so fine as that desk he made for her classroom. About time he found someone who appreciates quality workmanship. Pearl found she didn't mind the gentle gossip. After years of pitying whispers in Boston, the town's enthusiastic support felt refreshing. On a particularly beautiful Saturday in May, Mitchell invited Pearl for a picnic by Whitewater Creek, the rushing stream that gave the town its name. He collected her in his buggy, a wicker basket secured in the back. "You look lovely," he said as he helped her into the seat, his eyes appreciating the blue calico dress she wore. "Thank you," Pearl replied, smoothing her skirts. "It's such a beautiful day." They rode to a peaceful spot where the creek widened into a calm pool before continuing its journey. Wildflowers carpeted the bank, and a large cottonwood tree provided dappled shade. Mitchell spread a blanket and helped Pearl settle comfortably before unpacking the basket: fried chicken, potato salad, fresh bread, and apple pie. As they ate, they discussed their usual topics: town news, school matters, books they were reading. But Pearl sensed an underlying tension in Mitchell today, a nervous energy she hadn't seen in him before. After they finished eating, Mitchell suggested a short walk along the creek bank. He offered his arm for support, which Pearl accepted gratefully. They strolled slowly, pausing occasionally to admire particularly beautiful wildflowers or interesting stones. At a scenic overlook where the creek tumbled over rocks in a small waterfall, Mitchell stopped. He turned to face Pearl, taking both her hands in his. "Pearl," he began, his voice unusually solemn, "these past months have been the happiest of my life." Pearl smiled. "Mine too. When you came to Whitewater Springs, you thought you were starting over after disappointment. I thought I was simply helping our town find a teacher." Mitchell's blue eyes held hers intently. Neither of us realized we were finding something much more valuable. Pearl felt her heart quicken as Mitchell reached into his pocket and withdrew a small wooden box, clearly his own creation, carved with intertwining roses. "I built my life around creating beautiful things," Mitchell continued. "But nothing I've ever made compares to what we could build together." He opened the box, revealing a gold ring set with a single pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds. "Pearl Glover, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears blurred Pearl's vision as she looked from the ring to Mitchell's face. Dear and familiar now, filled with love and hope. "Yes," she whispered, then more strongly. "Yes, Mitchell. I would be honored to be your wife." Mitchell slid the ring onto her finger, then cupped her face gently in his hands. "May I?" he asked softly. At Pearl's nod, he lowered his lips to hers in their first kiss, tender, reverent, and full of promise. When they parted, Pearl saw her own joy reflected in Mitchell's eyes. "I never thought I'd find this," she admitted. "Someone who sees me, truly sees me." "I'll spend my life seeing you," Mitchell promised. "Every day, more clearly than the last." They returned to town hand in hand, Pearl's ring catching the sunlight with each step. Word of their engagement spread quickly through Whitewater Springs, bringing congratulations from every quarter. The date was set for August, giving them time to prepare while allowing the school term to conclude and the summer harvest to finish. Pearl wrote to her family in Boston, expecting perhaps disappointment that she wasn't returning east. Instead, her parents' response was enthusiastic, with promises to attend the wedding despite the arduous journey. They want to meet the man who accomplished what they thought impossible, Pearl told Mitchell as they read the letter together on the schoolhouse steps after classes one day. What was that? He asked, puzzled. Pearl smiled. Making me forget to be self-conscious about my leg. Mitchell shook his head. That wasn't me. That was you, discovering your own strength in a place that valued it. Perhaps, Pearl acknowledged. But you were the first to see that strength when I couldn't yet see it myself. The weeks leading to the wedding passed in a blur of preparations. The Ladies' Aid Society insisted on sewing Pearl's wedding dress, ivory silk ordered specially from Denver. Mitchell, meanwhile, worked long hours in his shop on a secret project he refused to discuss. Your wedding gift, was all he would say when Pearl inquired. You'll see it when we return from our wedding trip. The wedding day dawned clear and warm. Pearl stood in Martha Wilson's guest room, where she'd stayed the previous night according to tradition. Her mother fussed with the veil, while her father waited downstairs to escort her to the church. You look beautiful, my dear, Mrs. Glover said, her eyes misty. And so happy. I haven't seen you this confident since before your illness. I am happy, Mother, Pearl replied, smoothing the silk skirt of her gown. Mitchell loves me exactly as I am. As you deserve to be loved, her mother said firmly. Your father and I were so worried when you left Boston, but now I see you made the right choice. This is where you belong. The small church was filled to capacity when Pearl entered on her father's arm. Flowers decorated every surface, their sweet fragrance filling the air. But Pearl saw none of it. Her eyes fixed on Mitchell waiting at the altar, his expression one of pure adoration as she made her way toward him, her limp barely noticeable in the measured paces of the wedding march. Their vows were simple but heartfelt. When Mitchell promised to cherish Pearl in sickness and in health, his voice carried a depth of understanding that brought tears to many eyes. When Pearl pledged her love and devotion, her clear voice rang with certainty. I now pronounce you husband and wife, the minister declared. You may kiss your bride. Mitchell's kiss was gentle but fervent, a promise of the life they would build together. As they turned to face the congregation, Pearl felt a sense of completion she had never imagined possible when she'd first arrived in Wyoming territory, rejected and uncertain. The celebration continued at the town hall, transformed by the community into a festive venue with flowers, ribbons, and tables laden with food. Everyone in Whitewater Springs had contributed something. Mrs. Abernathy's famous cakes, Mr. Johnson's finest beef, wines from as far away as California. As the evening progressed, Pearl found a moment alone with her new husband, standing in a quiet corner while their guests danced and celebrated. Happy, Mrs. Thorne? Mitchell asked, his arms secure around her waist. Completely, Pearl assured him, leaning against his solid strength. Though I'm having trouble believing this is real. A year ago, I thought my chance for happiness had ended before it began. I'd say it was just beginning, Mitchell corrected. The moment Harrington was fool enough to reject you was the moment your true path opened. Pearl nodded thoughtfully. I came west seeking acceptance but found something far better. A place and a person who value me not despite my differences, but as a complete person, imperfections and all. There are no imperfections in you, Pearl Thorne, Mitchell said softly. Only the unique qualities that make you precisely who you are, the woman I love beyond measure. 3 days later, they returned from their brief honeymoon in Denver to the furniture shop and the apartment above it where they would live until their own home was completed on the edge of town. Mitchell led Pearl up the stairs, then paused at the door. Close your eyes, he instructed. Your wedding gift awaits. Pearl complied, hearing Mitchell open the door and guide her forward several steps. Now you can look, he said, his voice betraying his excitement. Pearl opened her eyes to find herself standing before the most beautiful writing desk she'd ever seen. Made of richly polished cherry wood, it featured intricate carvings of open books along its edges. The surface was spacious enough for papers and research materials, with cubbyholes for organizing correspondence and a center drawer perfectly sized for writing implements. Mitchell, she breathed, running her fingers along the smooth surface. It's magnificent. For your educational materials, he explained. You mentioned wanting to write teaching guides someday. I thought you should have a proper place to work. Pearl felt tears threatening again. Happy tears that seemed to come easily these days. You remembered. I remember everything you tell me, Mitchell said simply. Your dreams matter to me, Pearl. All of them. Pearl turned into his embrace, overwhelmed by the love she felt for this man who had helped her discover her true worth. Thank you. Not just for the desk, but for seeing possibilities when others saw limitations. Mitchell's arms tightened around her. Welcome home, Mrs. Thorne. In that moment, Pearl knew with absolute certainty that she had found where she belonged, not as someone's mail-order bride, not as an object of pity or charity, but as a woman fully seen and deeply loved, standing at the beginning of a life filled with promise and purpose. The journey that had begun with rejection had led her to the truest acceptance she could have imagined, a love that celebrated all of who she was, without reservation or condition. And in the years that followed, as Pearl and Mitchell built their life together in Whitewater Springs, raising children, contributing to their community, and supporting each other through challenges and triumphs, Pearl never forgot the lesson she had learned. Sometimes what appears to be the end of a dream is merely the beginning of a better one, waiting to be discovered by those brave enough to continue the journey.